After getting a breakfast at one of the hotel restaurants again, I immediately went down to Cumberland G to attend the Brony Church, aka Why Adults Enjoy Ponies panel, hosted by Fiora the Tank Girl. Okay, before I get into this, I need to talk about my top 10 most relatable MLP episodes list. I'm still proud of it, even if part 2 was a bit rushed without an honorable mentions part. I'm still proud I released it before the con, mostly because when I went to this panel, the strangest thing happened. At least 8 of my 10 choices were featured at that panel, and Fiora was absolutely incredible at the panel. Her details, her reasons, her justifications all culminated in why these situations are not just relatable to adults, but because they're worth relating to. Why it's important to not just put these things in a show, but a kid's show too. And you all remember that famous Disney quote, right? You know the one. You're dead if you aim only for kids. Adults are only kids grown up anyway. I have no hesitation in admitting that I was slightly choked up, as Fiora just hit the nail on the head of why adults watch MLP. I was impressed. The specifics of why are almost uncanny compared to what I said. Once upon a Zeppelin with Twilight being overwhelmed, the times they are a changeling with how afraid Thorax was to be accepted, and Spike's fear of losing his fame or his new friend. His fear from inspiration manifestation, losing his friendship with Rarity, Bloom and Gloom with Apple Bloom's anxiety, Party of One with Pinky's mental breakdown, Luna Eclipsed for Luna just trying to fit in, Amending Fences and Dew Princess's dream of magic sheep for Moon Dancer and Luna's depression. And even No Second Prances and A Rock Hoof and a Hard Place with its implications of suicide. And how I thought they could have both been better with a few simple edits. All ending with the Hearthswarming Club, and Gallus reminding everyone how lucky they are to have loved ones, and how he found that in his friends. Seriously, besides Read It and Weep and Sleepless in Ponyville, all of my other choices were mentioned at the panel. It was uncannily similar as well as inspirational. After the panel was over, we heard a whole bunch of stories about how some people got into the Brony fandom for the first time. One story I'll never forget is how someone originally underestimated it, and, well, a friend of hers showed her Smile HD, and then she watched the actual show and liked it. At least, that's how I think the story went. I even went up to her and said, we all had that one adult-oriented MLP project we were all exposed to, for better or for worse. Mine was Party.mov, and hey, we all turned out fine in the end. And through this scary content, we grew. And hey, don't forget, it's all attached to a much more innocent show at the end of the day. So please, find me a recording of this panel. And thanks Fiora the Tank Girl. After that absolutely magnificent panel, I finally met up with Diane again and Bobby C's outside of the main events hall, where we took a few pictures together. And with some guys in fursuits, apparently. And this is where I told Diane about how nervous I was to meet some of my idols. In particular, Lightning Bliss. But this is where I revealed something to her. I told her how I was thinking about talking to Lightning Bliss about a very important friend of mine that she knew for a while. I was in my friend's home state after all. She encouraged me to do it, and after taking a few pictures, I walked into the vendor hall and very hesitantly approached Lightning's booth. And I tried finding the right words to ask her about my best friend, Heartpaw Phoenix. There was a brief time where she knew Lightning Bliss and some of her friends, but the way she got to know them and got along with them involved a complex series of dominoes, where a friend of hers, Calida Rose, I hope I pronounced that name correctly, invited her to a group where Lightning Bliss and her friends were. But Heartpaw was hesitant about joining. So she came to me and asked if it was worth joining the group and getting to know her and her friends and to get along. And so I said yes. I convinced her that she could get along and that there was a way to do it. Getting to know them as people before knowing them as content creators. And, well, to do it for her friend. And so she did. And aside from a few dual calls where she jumped back and forth between her group and ours, that's all I knew. I just knew she was there until she died. When I was at the con, I had to know. I had to know once and for all that she actually got along with them, that she was actually behaving friendly and getting along with Lightning Bliss and her friends, that she followed my advice. And so despite how nervous I was, I asked her and Dusk, who was also at the booth, and Dusk apparently knew her too, and I couldn't have been any more satisfied with the answer. And so what I was told was, Lightning Bliss loved her, and Heartpaw was actually getting along with them. She listened to me, and it worked. I felt like I was going to cry. And Lightning Bliss hugged me. In many ways, it really did feel like Heartpaw was helping her friend see a window I desperately needed to from beyond the grave. Afterwards, I left the vendor hall when I found Diane and Bobby again in the main events hall where I would spend the rest of the con at. It first opened with a charity auction panel for an LGBT organization, and miraculously, it reached over its budget again for, I believe, the third time in a row. $12,000 to $13,000. And with that, the closing ceremonies began. Everyone who contributed to the con got on stage and stood together, before finally ending with an amazing PMV. Afterwards, we let out of the main events hall, and Diane was invited to go up to the tower. Sadly, I couldn't because I had to go, and so we told each other that we would see each other later. I was waiting for my cab when suddenly I ran back to the vendor hall and got Lightning Bliss's autograph. Just as I left, though, she told me one thing. Please keep her memory alive. A promise that I knew I needed to keep. This video will be one of many ways I fully intend to keep that promise. Lightning, if you're watching this, thank you so much for telling me. And I'm glad that even with Rose's help, that in some way, somehow I was able to convince her to meet you and to know you. And I'm glad you knew her along with so many others. Thank you, Bobby C's, for being an absolute amazing host. And thank you, Diane. Thank you so much for being there with me at the con. And thank everyone else for making this possible. And still, the con had one last surprise for me before I got home. My most recent video had suddenly boosted over 1,000 views when it only had less than 100 by the time I left. It was hard to believe. HarmonyCon 2024 remains one of the most emotional events I've had in years. But my faith in the Brony fandom was back, an important reminder of the friendships that had forged the fandom and what it should ever strive to be.